You're listening to the 14th Source for all geeky nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, November 4th, 2022, PTE. PTE, I created a designation, Andrew, because we now live in a post-Twitter era, because fuck that place.
It's funny, because I was thinking actually today, like at the end of the show, we're going to talk about social media, and I'm like, well, I'm done with Facebook, and I'm thinking it's time to fucking jump Twitter. So
honestly,
boy, oh boy, what a week.
I mean, I don't know if we should say this at the end of the show. Maybe we should, but like, I think, especially there are vibrant, valid communities on Twitter, like as you yourself participate in, right? Like the tabletop community is fairly active and supportive, and it seems like a kind of generally happy place on Twitter. It just happens to be in a place owned by a fucking maniac.
Right. Well, it's and even some of us have commented that it's actually getting, like, it feels like it's less useful. Like people are not seeing stuff just because the way it's prioritizing certain posts and whatever, the algorithm.
Right.
Algorithms. So it is that thing where the joke is actually for tabletop stuff. Although I was pining for Google Positive.
You're going to Truth Social finally?
No, I realize it's getting to the point where this is going to be bizarro. Reddit is one of the places, because there's a curated community with very aggressive moderation.
Yeah.
So like, there's no the shit we associate with Reddit, but it's still part of Reddit, which has had some ghosts in the house. Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. Like and actually a functional community online, moderation is really important.
Is key.
Who knew? And people actually want it. And yeah. I don't know, like
except Nazis, they don't want it.
No, because freedom of speech and all. God, let's not go on that train. But yeah, it's a
choo choo.
Who's playing Ticket to Ride? It's a strange world we're living in, especially in online, and obviously we will keep tab. Well, Andrew and I are going to keep watching what the hell happens on Twitter anyway. Whether we talk about it on the show or not is up to debate. If there's anything worth talking about that we actually have to bring to the table, maybe we will. But man, it's shaky ground right now, and I think this is the right time to talk about this, Andrew. We are opening up a new tier on our Patreon, so that our account can earn that $20 to keep that verified blue check mark on our official Twitter account.
All right, what I love is we don't have a Patreon
or a Twitter account,
or a community, group Twitter account.
Nor are we verified. So,
in fact, I think I remember like 6 years ago or something, you and I talked about we should make a Twitter account, and we just never did.
Right? Honestly, for all intents and purposes, keeping ourselves safe from Elon Musk's Twitter since 2014.
But yeah, so anyway, enough about the fall of society. We're here to talk about breaking, cutting edge television.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. You already talked about Quantum Leap.
We're here to talk about something that's so new.
Yeah.
It's like we're seeing it before anyone else, and it is.
Wow.
It's a TV show.
Okay.
What's it called, Dan?
It is called. Wait, let me check my notes here. Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Oh, damn! The next one after Discovery?
No. The next one after the original series, or as I like to say, OTS.
Those old scientists. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah. So here we are. We're here. We want to talk about Star Trek: The Next Generation specifically because Dan, you just finished watching it, right? Start to finish.
Well, we finished watching the television.
The series, the TV series. Yeah, you didn't see the movies.
No, so I am still at a deficit, or according to some, at a benefit. Who knows? We'll find out. But yeah, we finally finished after just over a year of starting the adventure across 2 streaming networks.
Right, because you started on Netflix and then it left Netflix, and you're like, well, shit.
Guess we'll have to sign up for P+. Oh, that's not a good thing to say out loud.
We're going to call it P plus again. Thank you.
Oh,
Paramount.
boy. And yeah, we brought it to its conclusion, and what a ride. It's interesting because like a lot of big endeavors, in some ways it feels like it went by very quickly, but then any other angle, it feels like it took forever. I was actually very surprised that it took just like literally like a year and a month to get through the entirety of Star Trek on my watch schedule. Now, on anybody else's watch schedule, that they could have gone through the series in like 3 weeks, right?
Right. I mean, let's keep in mind that you actually you tend to watch shows at a reasonable pace.
About one episode a day, yes.
So, but still, it's so you've seen this whole show, and this is. Although the original series definitely put the show, it created, it was the start, and other series did things as well. TNG, because of kind of the nature of the beast, it's really what kind of it turned into a franchise.
Right.
I mean, we had the original series, we had the original series movies, which they were already doing. They were, produced. 4, I think, had come out by the time TNG started, Star Trek 4, and so we knew Star Trek had legs again. But
they've been doing well. I think that's an important thing to mention.
Yeah, but Next Generation is where it attracted a whole new audience, and it really, I feel like, and you've said this before, and I comically always disagree with you, but also I agree with you that this is really what made it into a franchise more so than anything else.
I think so. Because, one, it lasted longer. I think the characters became almost, not more, it's bold for me to say more iconic, but as iconic because they had to hurdle the bar set by the original series, right? And so, like, it couldn't just be like, oh, what's this show's Spock? What's this show's Bones, right? That they had to actually create a new cast that were unique, individual, and as fleshed out and believable as any of the original series characters. And fuck me, they did it. Like, from episode 1, like, that's the thing. We could talk about seasons 1 and 2. I still enjoy them. There are, let's just say, hiccups, but you can't deny that from the beginning, those characters. And I think this is something they actually come to really emphasize and show in the series finale, that those characters are locked and so well thought through from the beginning that the show, I don't want to say had no chance of failure, obviously not, but like it was a big swing, and they actually they took the time to think through it and develop it to the point where, like, they had a pretty good sense of where they needed to swing to actually hit the ball. And that's the end of my sports metaphor.
Well, but I think it's important to really emphasize that they had a larger cast.
Right.
But definitely, if not larger, the cast that they had they were more prominent. Like, it's what that thing, if you go watch the original series, the opening credits only feature 3 names. Right. DeForest Kelley, Leonard Nimoy, and Bill Shatner. And the relationship with those 3 characters is iconic.
It's fantastic.
To the original series. The other characters are interesting, but they don't get as much time as compared to those 3. And so I think, whereas TNG, right, from the first episode, or maybe the second, you're seeing everyone's name in the opening credits. And it's like there's that feeling that everyone's getting episodes throughout the show, some more than others. Thank you, Data.
I think one of my early texts to you was like during the first 3 seasons. I'm like, I think this is the Data show, because of how much fun they're having probing kind of the plight of an android.
Well, and it's yeah, no doubt. But I think it is a big show, and really, you've watched it all in the course of a year. And here you are at the end of the journey, series finale, season 7, episode 25 and 26, I think is the official count. All good things. And we're here. So tell me, Dan, how do you feel about your Star Trek experience?
It was fine.
It's all right.
It's fine. I mean, ups and downs. I'm not going to say originally it's the show that made me a fan. I was never a fan probably before I started watching the series again recently, last year. But it was the Star Trek show that I was familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. And I never disliked. When you flipping through channels and Star Trek was on, I'm like, oh shit, this is great. But alternatively, it's the show that made me a fan. Because, let's be honest, we've been doing this show for a long time. And you've had me watch original series episodes, and we've had me watch movies. But like, and I didn't start watching this because of the podcast, but you know, I know you love Star Trek, and I'm like, well, I would love to love Star Trek as much as you. Obviously, I can only get so far with that, but but it never hurts to try. And so I'm like, well, let's just jump on with the thing that I am familiar with. And the final episode of the show was not in itself sad or emotional, except for the fact that I was done with The Next Generation, you know? And because of the quality of the show, I'm interested to see what comes next with Deep Space Nine. And it really has me, because you hear fanboys talking about, oh, Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show, or people comment, you know, speaking. I know people that love Voyager, as their favorite show. No one says that about Enterprise, but you know, I'm sure there are people.
there's one person out there, I bet.
But to even jump onto like Strange New Worlds, to take that leap and check out Lower Decks and actually find depth in the jokes that they're making.
Yeah, it's I think about that a lot because you know, while I talk about all these other shows, you know, TNG really lays this path, you know, for the other shows to either follow or to deviate from, and they all do, and they in very different, interesting ways.
Right.
Some less interesting than others.
So I guess the question I have for you, now that I have context, and considering where the show fit in history, because I remember seeing an article that actually ran through, I think it was before the premiere, that ran through the characters like, okay, that literally said like Geordi is the Next Generation's version of Spock. I'm like, really? All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of hot takes.
But the question I have, and this is kind of what I was thinking as the show is wrapping up, is the Next Generation Roddenberry's do-over on the premise? Like, do you think like he wanted to do it better or do it right, or do you think it was really a matter of him like, I have a new angle on this, let's see where this goes?
Well, it's always hard because, you know, there's interesting discussions about what Roddenberry was involved with and what he wasn't.
Roddenberry is kind of a controversial figure in the normal Star Trek.
Just the idea of what was, you know, where was he involved and where was he not. But I do think to a certain extent some of his ideas about what Star Trek was supposed to be, you know, and these ideas of kind of like a better future, we definitely see that with the Next Generation, and I think he tries it harder, right? He tries to make it more clear that this is like a great place, except that he starts to deviate from that, whether either he does or they do. You know, I mean, I always feel like even in the first season we see Conspiracy, where it's like, whoa, hard, you know, pump the brakes. That feels very antithetical to this perfect future. You know, but at the same time, we see a lot of these situations of like, look at how great the Federation is, and look how great humanity has become. To the point where he even, I think, if I recall, they say originally there was the intent was not to feature Klingons in the Next Generation because they were like these kind of token evil characters from the original series. He's like, well, that's just, I don't want that. Now, comically, that didn't last long because they literally put one in the show in the main cast.
Were the Klingons featured regularly in the original series? I know they became much more, you know, prevalent in the movies, right?
I mean, they have like, there's like 4 or 5 episodes, I think.
Oh, really?
Of the original series, right? Trouble with Tribbles, Day of the Dove, the something Organa or whatever, Organians. I forgot what Errand of Mercy? No, that's the Romulan one. I don't remember. They all got names like that. It's like 3 or 4 maybe episodes with Klingons, and they're always kind of like this. They're like iconically just bad guys who really aren't that redeemable. It's because they were just bad guys to oppose this delightful Federation.
Right.
And which is why I think when they're introduced in the Next Generation, they're done more than just bad guys. They're given culture.
They were not part of the Federation in the original series.
No, and they still aren't, right?
They aren't?
No. The Klingon Empire is not part of the Federation.
Oh, you're right. Worf is just weird. Yeah.
Just because one Klingon raised by Russians on a farming planet.
If you put put a minority character in fiction, Andrew, that character represents the entire race. We know that, right?
Right.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Although actually, there's a side story of actually what I love about Worf as a character as that representation of his people, because he in fact is like an extreme representation of his people, but it's like the one who doesn't actually know his own culture.
Right. That's the interesting thing about. I mean, honestly, what we could do for this episode is just kind of go through the characters and like talk about how actually complex they are, because they got 7 seasons and basically between 22 and 26 episodes a season to really flesh things out. And I think the show benefited from the fact that it was basically through and through an episodic series, that they got to really explore character moments more than just plot-based stories. That's one thing. If I could talk about expectations versus what I got, I knew that, at least I still think that, I might be wrong now, actually, now that I think about it, that Deep Space Nine goes in a much more serialized direction.
Yes.
And I was always under the impression, because I knew that Deep Space Nine started in the middle or, towards the back third of Next Generation. And I was always on the presumption that Next Generation kind of went that direction as well. It did not.
It didn't. No.
It is an episodic series through and through, which, again, one of the things that got us on board real quickly was the episodic nature of the show. It's like, these are tightly constructed, focused, generally well thought through kind of like stories of characters and moments.
Generally is doing a lot of lifting.
I mean, especially those first couple of seasons, which are still great seasons to watch. Do not fear watching those first two. Listen, I'll spit in the face of every Star Trek fan. Watch the first 2 seasons of Next Generation. They're fine. There are a couple stinkers in there. Some are worse than others. Some are actually kind of abominations, but so is every show's got one of those, perhaps. But it was always great just to sit down and just consume a story without having to like wait for the countdown for the next episode to start. It's like, this is just a complete thing that, especially with the way my wife Nicole and I, that's 2 people, not like my wife Nicole and I, my wife Nicole and I watch TV, is that the thing is, we talk a lot, we pause a lot. Hour-long shows can become 3-hour shows, and especially with something like Star Trek, we definitely found a rhythm of like, well, we would just watch the show because we don't have that kind of time. But a majority of episodes we would be talking about afterwards. But before I go too far into sort of my own experience, I was kind of wondering, how did you codify what the Next Generation is in your mind? And I want to kind of see how you think of the show versus how I think of the show, especially now that it's done. Like, what sort of tone, what kind of themes, what kind of memories do you have associated with the Next Generation that you kind of were thinking of or keeping in mind as you recommended I dive into the show?
Well, for context, the show started when I was very young.
87.
87. I was 7. Right.
So was I.
Yeah. And my experience with Star Trek was watching old episodes that my father had recorded on VHS.
Right.
So I knew I liked this thing, Star Trek. Right. Although, I mean, as a 7-year-old, what did I don't know if I really got it. But so that show, I mean, and then 7 years later, I was 14, I think, 8th grade, maybe 7th or 8th grade. I feel like maybe ninth grade. 9th grade. Yeah. I remember I grew up with the show. So to a certain extent, that show was just, it was the show I watched. And I think over time is Star Trek continued to do its thing, and other properties, other fictional universes I became aware of them. I mean, the Next Generation has always been this show where one of my friends, in dismissing it, said it's the show where the all-wise father, the family faces a crisis, and the all-wise father helps them navigate a course to a solution, all within 44 minutes. Sometimes 88
but
minutes.
Okay,
it is reductive. It is, but at the same time, that's fine. Right? To a certain extent, Star Trek has always been about, at least the original series was, we button it up at the end of the show. In most cases, everything is solved. We understand that this is what happens. This is
right.
We solve problems
due to the restrictions of the format they were airing in. Right.
Well, but it wasn't also something where we didn't regularly see things left broken. Right. We didn't see what maybe later would become the reality of the Federation. But, I mean, it's like what Lower Decks really emphasizes, like, yeah, you guys, you rock first contact, but then no one ever really follows up after that.
Well, and also there's like the idea of Star Trek, of Next Generation, I should say. And actually, I don't know about the subsequent series, but being a show made for syndication also reinforced that idea of episodic storytelling. Right.
Yeah. And that was because you didn't know where it was playing, when it was playing. Some people may be watching it at 2 a.m. in their local whatever affiliate. Some people may be watching it whatever. And it's actually it's really interesting because I remember this being a thing where I moved from Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo, California, and I went from watching it on Monday at 8 p.m. on a channel that I don't even know what the station. I think it eventually became maybe a UPN.
Right. That sounds about right. Yeah.
But the LA channel. But then when I moved to San Luis Obispo, it was the following Saturday at like 6 p.m. And so it was this weird thing where like it was just so like the show was in syndication. It was very episodic, and the idea that some people may have just been getting it whenever it aired.
Right. I think that's kind of like, I never sat down to watch it. I don't know when it aired we were in the same town, obviously, but like it was one of those things where, like, as I was insinuating earlier, like flip through the channels and you can kind of probably find somewhere that's playing it. And that was never a bad time.
So, but I think it was a show where there was something comforting about it. Something generally most episodes were kind of wholesome, where you see things get resolved and the good guys win, and the good guys are good guys. And I'm not saying that that's required, right? Because in fact, later Star Treks would definitely pull that thread in a lot of meaningful ways. But at the time, TNG was what it was. We got to see some strange new worlds, which all looked like Set 13, or a park near Los Angeles. Was it? There's like
people in very sheer clothing are running around.
There's a lot of sheer. Apparently every species either wears really uncomfortable turtlenecks or sheer.
Right. Or just, I mean, honestly, apparently the standard top, no matter gender, which is very progressive in his own right, is just blouse. And
well, there's also, I mean, like the scant, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
but there was some, like, I think it was always it was a good show. I enjoyed it, and I remember when the finale came in 1994. I remember, like, it wasn't sad, but it was like, wow, it was over, and I really enjoyed that, and I didn't want it to stop. Although at the time I also had Deep Space Nine, which had just started to, like, it was finding its voice.
Right. That's not with TNG. Like, put away these childish things. Let's talk about real sci-fi here.
Well, and what's funny is, and I still this day joke that as TNG ends, Deep Space Nine punctuates it by showing a Galaxy-class starship get destroyed. Like, at the same time, like, they even, one of the writers says, yeah, that was us kind of like breaking off from being look, that's TNG's over, folks. You just watch the Enterprise blow up. It's not the Enterprise, but it looks like the Enterprise, right?
Right.
And they went on their own direction, and then later Voyager comes back with whatever the direction it was doing, which I think it found some. It had some strong episodes, although it also had a lot more weaker episodes. But that's a different discussion for a different time.
That's a show that started up in the middle of DS9 as well, right?
Yeah, it starts after. Basically, I would be stunned if it wasn't a year or two after TNG ends. But yeah, I mean, I think just TNG was I think it's a great show for what it does, and what it does that was a weird qualifier. But I mean, I think,
yeah, that was.
I don't think it's bad. And I think when you look at some of the new Star Treks, some of the new Star Treks do the same thing. Like I feel like Strange New Worlds is punching in the same orbit of an episodic show where you have character development, you feel like you get to know these characters, and you're just seeing kind of like here's a strange new world or like a new planet or whatever every week.
My counter to that is that, and this is just the nature of modern TV, because I think modern TV is based around serialization, that there's something different about the episodic nature of Strange New Worlds that is not present in TNG, because it was a qualifier of them having a show, right? In TNG, they had to be episodic because that's how TV was. With the episodic nature of Strange New Worlds, it feels almost quirky. It's their kink, And I'm not denigrating the show. It's a wonderful show.
That's necessarily true, though. I mean,
every other show they make is pretty much serialized.
Right, but I'm saying with TNG, they made the choice, based on the format, but that's a choice they didn't have to make. And in fact, DS9, which was also syndicated, ends up not making that choice. Which
but that's like 5 years later, right?
Yeah,
and because they couldn't. I honestly would. This is me being bold, not to be the. Listen, I know you have your. I might be an unobjective Star Trek fan here, unlike you, Mr. Logic. But like, I think DS9 doesn't enter a world of serialization without TNG laying the groundwork to kind of play with that idea. If TNG didn't exist, I don't think DS9 would have been able to do what it did. It would have had to have been an episodic adventure.
I think that serialized television wasn't uncommon. It existed. It just wasn't. I mean, like Dallas, for God's sake, right? Was a huge show.
That was also not.
It was
syndicated.
Network, sure.
Yeah,
I know that's true. But then, and I think if we can dig around and find other shows, obviously. But
honestly, we could have a whole episode about just episodic or syndicated television. There's a lot.
And there's actually, if you when in 20 years when you finish Deep Space Nine, the documentary, they actually discussed their choice to serialize in season 2, because they didn't start doing it until season 2, and they did it basically against like the wishes of like they were like it was a risk they took, and they there it was not. But I think the idea is that could have been done. I really think more that TNG really started with what we saw in the original series, which was a network show, right? It was just that they were just doing an episodic show. And I mean, when you think about it, right, Wagon Train to the Stars, boy, oh boy, that line will never die. There was this idea they were making an episodic show. They had that bonus of doing the episodic where they knew who the fuck would, you don't know where you're going to be watching it. But it's that weird thing because I think back to a lot of shows I watched as a kid, or in that era, like the late 80s, early 90s, and how many of them ended up being syndicated. And in the various levels they went to do serialization or not, and whether TNG influenced these other shows. I mean, stuff like Hercules and Xena, right, were both syndicated. Think about now, Buffy was not syndicated; it was a network show. But I think it's one of those things where TNG definitely had an impact.
It was a large ensemble. Like that's the thing. Like kind of going off. So that was kind of what your impression of at this point of what TNG is. Me coming out of this, like what I'm kind of taking away from it is that because of the episodic nature of the show, and it kind of makes me interested in seeing a more serialized version of Star Trek, despite the character drama that they touch on, they don't they abandon storylines very quickly. What Star Trek: The Next Generation for me is like a modern fable that they have morals of the story, for lack of a better week, for lack of a better word, every week, that is made less didactic because they also layer the character interaction and the interpersonal stories on top of things. As maybe part of this is me as a teacher coming through. It's like, oh, they make some good points here, but like, I don't think it was that. It's just like, it comes back to me really liking the self-contained nature of these episodes, where they have a point they want to make. Whether they make it well or not is for debate, but I think the kind of rhythm they found themselves in was the challenge of how do we, not to be pretentious here, but echo that idea of what poetry can be as elucidated by the Roman poet Horace, that art should be sweet and useful, dulce et utile, right?
I was going to say, I know where we're going.
Right?
It's not a podcast if Dan
toot that horn. And they, like, that, as a person that almost like creatively lives by that mantra, like it's just, for even on the episodes that falter, it hits or it rings that bell consistently and constantly, so that it was a euphoric experience watching this show, even for the episodes that I might have fallen asleep during. But you know what? It's bound to happen. You can't say enough about the show and how its success without talking about the wonderful cast and the characters that they created. And like, obviously the show's been off the air for 100 years, but like, I just want to take a moment to just like, what a crew. What an absolute beautiful crew. And I think, if anything, maybe we could spend the last part of this episode just talking about the finale, because it does a lot of things. Because, and I guess spoiler alert, they take us on a ride
for this show from 30
from 1994. Ago? Yeah, we are 42 now. It ended when we were 14. Jesus, that really hit hard thinking about that. But thanks a lot, Andrew. It's an interesting episode because it is almost, it's not a clip show, but it's definitely a retrospective on like the major eras of the run, including future episodes that may or may not ever happen, right? Mm-hmm. And what I love about that final episode is that despite kind of the timey-wimey bullshit that was happening, it really highlighted the characters. And to me, that was the most fitting finale you could give a show like this. Mm-hmm. And especially the bookends of Picard running into Worf and Deanna in the hallway at the beginning, at the end. It was chef's kiss beautiful. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And actually, what I actually really liked about it, I think is a concept, is that, you know, that for those that aren't aware, for the two of you, of the three of you that listen to the show, the idea that the show starts with you know, the captain observing that something's going wrong, and we discover he's time traveling between 3 points in his life. And right. Basically, one of them is the beginning of the show, and one of them is the end of the show, and then one is the far future.
I wondered if they were talking about the show Picard, but Andrew said it no.
Well, no, yeah, as it ends up, that had not been planned in 1994.
Right.
Although,
I like your response. She was like, "Well, he owns a vineyard."
Yeah, that's a similarity. But because I think there is this idea of, and actually I think the idea that future ends up being like a cautionary tale, because that's a future where things didn't go the way you might want.
Right.
But at the same time, you know, it is a way for an episodic show to wrap it, saying, look, here's the first episode, and here's the last episode, and here's the future, but in a way that wasn't like trite. You know, they gave it. It wasn't like, oh, haha, it wasn't a clips episode. It wasn't like a really smarmy wrap up. It did really have this sense of, and we brought back a nemesis from the show that maybe not everyone's favorite, but his appearance in this episode actually fits, because not only was he in the first episode, but we've now seen his relationship specifically with Jean-Luc Picard grow to the point where what we see is him saying, look, you know, your people are going to be wiped from existence. Yeah. However, I'm throwing you a bone, like I'm here to help you out because guess what? I actually like you.
Right. The other thing that I think the show this finale avoids is sentimentality. And I think so it's not, I mean, we just talked about a Doctor Who regeneration episode. Actually, I think aside from the classic, the bones that were thrown to classic fans, it was kind of a regen. Okay, I know you have problems with me calling it a regeneration episode, but like, it was a regeneration of a Doctor with not a whole lot of sentimentality. Not like David Tennant's regeneration, right? Where it's just like, I don't want to go. It's like, calm the fuck down. And he goes and visits every companion he had over the last 4 years or whatever. Like, pump the brakes, buddy. But I think that lack of sentimentality, one is in tune with what the show is about, but also is undermined by the fact that it is a Q episode. And he would call out sentimentality. He's like, oh, you're just a shill like I always thought you were. And it's like, well, shit, Q. Okay, let's solve the problem, I guess, without being sad about it. And to your point, like, yeah, you were kind of being polite. I have not been a vocal fan of Q. And I will say this. I don't remember if I told you this or not, so I don't know if this was a very good Q episode. Which part of the problem is like, should I be saying that about the finale of a series? but here we are saying it anyway. But especially in contrast to the fact of how the series started as a Q episode. So there is a poetic justice and especially for someone that absolutely hated Q to come around in this episode. And I think I texted you this when he actually shows up in the episode because all the timey-wimey bullshit was happening. I'm like, oh, thank God Q's here. Right. And I'm like, you know what? Okay. The last kind of character they had to turn me around on, because they turned me around on one, Picard's weird hatred of children in like the first episode. They turned me around on Tasha Yar being kind of a weirdo. They turned me around on Worf being a belligerent grunt. They turned me around on Q. And I'm like, well, you literally ticked all the boxes. Well done. I guess we can finally part ways. And appropriately, it was with the series finale.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because I think that relationship of Q, we see it also in the episode Tapestry in season 6, where it's like, and that's a weird one, right? But it's also, but it really like, to me, it's one of the Qs at his best. And actually, I will say that we see a little bit of that in Picard season 2. Without saying too much because there's a lot going on there. And I think, again, that's how that we see that relationship with that character. And so I think it was a good way. I think he was the right one to bring in, right? I think him being there at the ending, I think it made a lot of sense. I try to think of season finale or series finales for Star Trek shows. The original series didn't have one. TNG had All Good Things. Deep Space Nine has What You Left Behind, which is, I think, also very impactful, although a very different way, because at that point, Deep Space Nine had become season 7, back half of season 7 is just a serial, literally episode to episode. And so this is like the culmination of all of it.
So it's just the denouement of a larger story.
Right. But I think they do that well. Voyager has a weird 2-part episode that kind of it really doesn't feel like it wraps the show. It ends. I think I like the episode, but it feels very specific, and I'd argue it wraps season 4. Like it's this weird thing where like, oh, you brought this, because really it's like we only had one real thing to focus on, and then Enterprise just has a TNG Gaiden is the season.
Oh, really?
Series,
yeah.
Right. So I think All Good Things really is probably one of the, like, a high watermark for series finales for Star Trek, and I'll be curious to see how other shows kind of compare to that. But I mean, like I said, as an episodic television show, I thought they really did a great job of making me feel like this was a good ending. we see all these characters. We see them. We get to see some of them in the past, so we get to see how they've grown.
And they put on the original season 1 costumes too, which was wow.
They do. Though they didn't change his chair. That's like my one salty thing as a nerd, because his the captain's chair changes after like season 1 or 2.
Right.
But
they brought back the original bridge, I want to say. Like, I feel the bridge is different, or was that always the same?
No, it's the same.
Okay, I just noticed for some reason the hardwood more when they were in the past.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain that it's the same. They just may be lighting it and there may be some other changes I'm unaware of, but
and I can see them being nerds for that. It's like we used to light the room this way in seasons 1 and 2, and that could be enough. Sure.
And so we see that, and then we get to see this kind of future in the characters in a place where I think the perception is that we're not supposed to like where they're at. Right. Part of it's that they've all grown apart. Part of it that some of them, have had more negative experiences with one another. I'm actually really curious, given what we know, Picard season 3 features the entire original cast. I'm curious to see how that actually compares.
Right.
Because it is a similar idea of, there's an emergency. We need to get all our old friends together.
Yep, which the future timeline of this episode is very much in that vein as well.
So I don't like.
Well, that's the thing. Actually, if you don't mind me risking a spoiler, because in this season finale, it's kind of revealed in that future timeline, divergent or not, Picard is diagnosed with a degenerative disorder.
Yes, that comes up in Picard.
Okay.
And I'm gonna step away from that one, because that's
Fair
actually
enough.
That comes up in Picard season 1. So.
Okay, it's interesting finale for a couple of reasons, because one of the things I was thinking about while watching it, because again for Picard, well, there's 2 things I want to talk about with regard to the main sort of thrust of the narrative of Picard bouncing between timelines, and it's just like literally he walks through a door and he's like, oh shit, I'm in the past, and then he like falls asleep and he wakes up in the future. It's kind of these quick cuts. He's not like traveling through a time wormhole or anything. I think it's clear that Strange New Worlds was kind of trading on this mechanic a bit, especially with its finale, and I really liked it. But 2, what I love is that it is a great portrait of the kind of leader Picard is, which is you could make an argument is what part of what the major narrative of Next Generation is all about, because we see him love and lose, we see him succeed, we see him fail, we see him live an entire life in an AI program and learn how to play a flute, right? And lose an entire family and watch a planet die. We see him violate the orders of the Federation, but what it all comes down to, and I think this beautifully portrays the kind of person he is, not just kind of the role he plays in the show, is that as the show goes on, as the episode goes on, and we are bouncing between all these timelines. At first, it was always marked by a period of disorientation, right? And he's like, what's going on here? And he's having trouble remembering things. But once the shit hits the fan and he knows what he has to do, as soon as the time shift, he's like, oh, okay, let's do this. And there's no disorientation at all. It's like everything's put on the same timeline for him because he has an objective. He has a goal, which is ultimately to protect his crew and protect his ship.
His species, right? and his
species,
world,
right?
And his galaxy.
And since we're here, and it's not really part of the conversation, but can we reveal how he destroyed the entire species of humanity? Because they make it seem like, oh, he fucked up something with the Enterprise and everything.
Yeah, well, so this, you just want me to point out that I had this
let's
burning...
let's just reveal it, because it's pretty stupid and great.
So the idea is that he's time bopping between these 3 times, and in all 3 times, because he knows he starts figuring it out. He uses the same method of shooting an inverse tachyon beam at what will become this anomaly.
Right. Sorry. I guess we should say, I don't remember if we say this. He's hopping through time and he's freaking the fuck out, but then he's like, Q must be involved, and so he just starts shouting, Q, where the fuck are you?
Yeah, there's all sorts of weirdness like that.
And Q's like, what's up? Yeah, were you making me jump through time? He's like, yeah, sorry about that. But Q says like, and this is where it calls back to the first episode of the show, where he's like, you're on trial again. He's like, no, we won. He's like, no, the trial's never been over, dude. Humanity's on trial.
Right.
And then he reveals this bit saying, you destroyed humanity, Picard. And and you know, fix it or not, I'm Q, fuck you. Right? And so then Q eventually reveals how Picard destroys humanity.
Yes, and it's a paradox, because the whole point is that he causes it by trying to find it. You know, because they know there's this anomaly, the blah, blah, and in the effort of trying to find it, he shoots this inverse tachyon beam at an anomaly in 3 different times, and somehow that interacts. And it's emphasized 3 different times from the same ship, right? The Enterprise. And it's that fun thing where like, yeah, you're right. And what's weird is when you watch the episode, 99% of people are like, yeah, he did do that. And then you think back and you're like, wait, hold the phone.
Yeah.
In the future, it was actually the USS Pasteur, right. Which is like, you know what? Okay, so Q is not an expert on whatever chrono, quantum, blah, blah, but...
right. Hey, it's a continuum, not a chronicle. All right.
But yeah, so that's the one thing I always thought. I always joked that like, well, I guess they got it wrong.
Although, but that's the thing. Like the beam, the problem is like one of the things how they destroy humanity is like they go back to like the creation of the universe basically, and like fuck it up from the beginning. Right. So it's not like yeah. So it's like, all right, you destroyed the goo that eventually became life. Way to go, Picard. It's pretty great. And I guess the question I have is one. Let's talk about let's talk about Riker's Enterprise in the future. Where did he get the extra nacelle?
They had it, welded on. Right.
It's a future of kit bashing, right? But no. The question I have is, what can I watch next? Obviously, DS9 is on the table. The movies are on the table, I guess. And can I just kind of watch those like one a weekend if I wanted to, or do I have to watch like 2 seasons of DS9 before I can understand Insurrection?
No, you can just go watch the movies however you want. The only and I've told you via text, but I'll tell it for the fans. The only thing that you'll have to figure out is what the fuck's going on with Worf. Because after the first movie, Generations, he actually becomes a regular on Deep Space Nine, but he's still contracted to the movies.
Right.
And so they have at least in First Contact and Insurrection, they have to bring him there. Now, the way they do it in First Contact is actually perfect. But Insurrection, they literally have a scene where like, hey, Worf showed up. And you're like, oh, you're like, okay.
I was wondering if they're just going to clerks him. He's like, I'm not even supposed to be here today.
It's just, yeah, but so that's the real, and they mentioned some stuff, I think, in Insurrection that you'll have no context for. I think if you watch Nemesis, there will be a scene where you're like, who's this Admiral Janeway lady?
Okay, yeah.
But she's only, it's a cameo. But yeah, you could watch any Star Trek is open to you now, other than I actually would recommend against Picard.
That's the question.
Until you've watched through all the movies at least, and you may want to watch some Voyager.
Oh, interesting. Okay, it's good to know. It's interesting because the smoke on the street that I've heard about Picard is very divisive or divisive, depending on how you want to say it. People either absolutely hate it, or people think it's all right. So I'm kind of interested to see what that's all about. But when does Worf join DS9?
Season 4, I think.
Okay, which is
3 or 4.
So that's like by the time TNG ends, DS9's going for a couple seasons at that point, right?
Yeah, they finished their second season as TNG ends season 7.
Okay, so there's a couple seasons before Worf shows up, and there's one more question, but I forgot. Yeah, and so like, where's the Kelvin universe? No, joking. I'm not going to talk about that.
That's loosely mentioned in Picard as well.
Of course it is.
It is definitely mentioned in Discovery.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
You're like, what? Yeah.
My final thoughts on The Next Generation is that I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I committed to it. I'm glad I watched everything. I'm glad I didn't skip anything. because it really painted a full picture of what Star Trek is and what it can be, at least as far as I'm concerned. But as I was talking to my wife about this, and I agree with her, it's like because it lasted for so long, because it was playing with the medium so much, we're both really excited to watch more Star Trek, because just with more time and new cast and new crew, I'm really interested to see what they do with this premise next. I remember when I told her, like, the premise of Deep Space Nine is that it's a ship that doesn't go anywhere, right? People come to it, right? Because it's a space station, right? She's like, "Oh, that sounds awesome." I'm like, well, there's Quark. And she's like, "Oh, shit. Ferengi and the main cast? Really?" I'm like, "Yeah. But we'll go over that hump next. Let's just focus with that." I want to thank you, Andrew, for guiding me through this journey. I think I probably texted you more than once watching through every single episode of the show. And you were a fun companion to have on that adventure.
You know, it's and I think, like I said, there's a lot of Star Trek to watch, and you know, and I think is a franchise. It's been around for a while, and I think it has a lot to offer. And I actually would argue that a lot of it, I think, still holds up. You know, there are times where you either get an episode where you're like, "Oof, that was just not a good episode," or like the original series has a lot more of like, "Okay, that was made in the '60s," you know. Right, but at the end of the day, there's still some stuff that really you watch, you're like, wow, that was actually really good. You know, this is a television show that really, I think it deserved to exist, and I think it deserves to continue to exist.
Yeah.
While some people may not like it, that's fine. I think the different, you know, permutations of it now continue to push in different directions and do different things, and invoke our imaginations and our spirit in different ways. I've always been a Star Trek boy first, and I continue to be.
I mean, Doctor Who's better, but whatever.
All right, and wrap it up.
So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page of this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments and engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well, such as Twitter and on Instagram, begrudgingly in some cases. You can find us on Twitter at our respective handles, which means you can find Andrew talking about tabletop role-playing games at Profound Dark. You can find me at Bethel. You can find us on Instagram as well, where you can find Andrew at Profound Brick and me and my work at Bethel Comics.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you may already be on listening to our show, which is on there. If you are, please like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod, the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review, whether a text review or using their proprietary metric to help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. I have been confronting a crisis, Andrew. I don't know if you've heard about this.
No.
The world's in chaos, and so the supply chain is severed, and the drought is affecting everybody. But the true victim of all these things is Sriracha.
Oh, I have heard this, actually.
I've been going to the store, like my wife and I kind of division of duties. I go to regular stores, as she calls it, and she goes to Costco because she literally works right next to a Costco. And she's like, pick up some sriracha. And like every time for like the month, I'm like, I'm trying, dude. I'm trying. And then she went to a regular store, quote unquote, and looked for sriracha because apparently I'm incompetent. And she's like, there's no fucking sriracha. I'm like, right? And then she looked it up and it's like, yeah, there's literally no sriracha. There's apparently, because of the drought, their supply of chilies, or I guess their fields of chilies, are dead.
Right. They had a massive... I think they have some, but nowhere near the volume they normally have.
Right. So they're kind of waiting to regrow their stock to bring it back to our shelves. In the meantime, we did buy a bottle of Tabasco that the bottle looks like a lot like a Sriracha bottle, and it literally says on the bottle, Sriracha. Basically, it's Tabasco saying, we got chilies, you don't, comma, bitches. And it's filling a void, which is nice, but man, I never thought I'd live in a world with no Sriracha. And yet here we are. Just another piece of evidence that the world is coming to a close.
Yep. There we go.
I know you're a hot sauce guy. That's why I bring it up.
I think the only reason I've survived this is because I have so many other hot sauces that I've not been using as much sriracha that I still have a bottle.
Are you a boutique hot sauce guy? Do you like?
Man, we literally have an episode where I talked about having a subscription to hot sauces. Okay,
that's still is that still going?
Every quarter I get one, so 3 boxes. So yeah,
beautiful.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me write that down in my notes real quick. So until you're able to get your hands on some quality hot sauce, my dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
I'm trying to think of a good pun, like a sriracha disaster, a sriracha. No.
Nope.
It doesn't work. That was my experience teaching a night class, at least. Brains just stopped working at about 8 o'clock. I'll just get on this. I'm just going to start this train. Choo choo, toot toot. Is that what a train makes?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't play Ticket to Ride, so I don't know what sounds a train makes.
That's a good point. Ticket to Ride does, in fact, have train noises.
I mean, I'm guessing depending on the version.
Well, the video game, yeah, not the tabletop game.
Yeah.
The user supplied in that case. All right.
Hooray pizza.